John Fetterman, who is the lieutenant governor of Pennsylvania and has been since 2019 and is currently running for Senate. Pat Toomey is retiring and his seat will be available in 2022. How are you doing today, John?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm, as a progressive, I'm excited about your candidacy, and it's great to talk to you today, especially given what's going on in Texas and throughout the country, and the fact that you've signed a no fossil fuel money pledge. So you're a great person to talk to about this. But I wanted to start off with a recent story about you and Governor Wolf and how you both decided to grant clemency to 13 people serving life in prison, including two men who committed a carjacking in 1980. The woman died of a heart attack. Can you talk about that decision, why that's been so central to your tenure, and those kinds of moves as Lieutenant Governor of Pennsylvania?
Yeah, great question. This was centered around two brothers from Philadelphia who made a really bad choice one day in 1980 to carjack somebody. He was an older gentleman, and they approached him with a non-functional weapon and said, "We want your car." And they got in the car with him, and he began to develop some heart pains. And they said, "Well, take your medicine. We don't want the." And they dropped him off at a payphone. And then subsequently later, he died of a heart attack. So without a doubt, those men have culpability. They should not have done that. But at the end of the day, they were offered a plea deal of 10 years. If they plead to it, and their lawyer said, "Well, we can get a better deal. This isn't right." So they ended up getting convicted of second-degree murder, and they have spent 40 years in prison, and they were going to die in prison, but for my intervention to get them before to the governor's desk. And what's also remarkable about this story too is the victim's daughter said that if you don't let these men out, my family will never be able to heal. My family doesn't want this. These two men do not deserve to die in prison. They shouldn't have done what they did, but they had no point wanted to harm her father, and they recognize that. And it's so amazing when you look at 84% of the people serving life without parole in Philadelphia are Black. And, these two brothers and others, there were many other on that list in that same situation. And the governor and I got them out. And that is the core philosophy for me, is believing in second chances and redemption, and how we need to put a lot of the wrong injustices like second-degree murder in Pennsylvania, and we need to fix them.
Right. I mean, I think that's an amazing story. And would you bring that kind of philosophy to your Senate campaign? How would you communicate that statewide and make it clear to your constituents why this is a just cause?
Sure, very much so. I mean, let me be clear. I'm the first lieutenant governor in the history of Pennsylvania that's completely reimagined and revolutionized the pardons and commutation process here in Pennsylvania, because we want to make sure that we're getting the justice part right. If we could get rid of second-degree murder, whereas you have somebody who was sitting in a getaway car serving the same effective sentence of dying in prison as the Tree of Life shooter, why wouldn't we want to do that? We need to remember that people age out of crime. We are in the forgiveness business with respects to commutations. We are not in the perpetual punishment business. And my commitment to criminal justice reform is stronger than anyone else's that could get into this race, because I've actually been doing it. And the work that the governor and I have done in these last several years has helped revolutionize the idea of a second chance here in Pennsylvania.
That's great. I think obviously Trump got a lot of headlines for granting clemency to people, but did nothing substantive on the issue. And it would be great to have another voice in the Senate who was pushing for that. So I wanted to turn to what's happening more concentratedly, I guess, in Texas right now with the extreme weather that we're seeing, which scientists have said it's a result of climate change. As the Arctic heats, you're going to have a frequency and the intensity as well of storms like this. You've signed a no fossil fuel money pledge. I wanted to open up that broadly. What is your take on what's happening in Texas? And then also just the fact that the right wing has seemingly coalesced behind a propaganda narrative about how this is the result of green energy, which is completely disconnected from facts. So what are your thoughts on what's happening nationally right now?
Sure. Well, it wasn't long ago before Texas was mocking and pointing at California and like, look at their, look at the troubles they're having with their power grid, and like cue the massive failure of Texas's own power grid. I mean, they have their own power grid in Texas. So this is completely a homegrown situation in Texas. And the truth is, to your point, is divorced from reality. All the energy sources are down. It's not just green. The petroleum and natural gas have been frozen out too. So let's be very clear about that. This is a crisis of infrastructure. This speaks perfectly to the idea that we need to invest trillions in revolutionizing green energy, our infrastructure, and make sure that it's done, it preserves the sanctity of the union way of life. Think of all the union jobs for men and women that kind of a project of that kind of scope will create. And I'm not surprised that the Republicans are using this as an opportunity to bash green energy. I mean, especially in Texas. I mean, look at how honest they were about voter fraud in this last election.
Meaning not at all. Yes.
Yeah. So this is an enormous opportunity and a wake-up call. One, climate change is real and it must be acted on rapidly. That we need to invest trillions in revamping our infrastructure with respects to our power grid. And two, me signing this pledge is consistent with the person I've always been. I signed this in every race where it was an available option to do. And I want to be clear, I have never, ever, nor will I ever take a single dime from the industry.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I accidentally muted myself. You're running on small dollars, correct?
Correct. Our average campaign contribution, we're approaching $2.2 million in a little about 5 weeks, and it's 100% grass powered. Over 70,000 individual donors with an average donation of under $30, and I'm so proud of that fact because there's not a lot of $2,800 checks in there, because it speaks to the strength of the message, and it speaks to the strength of the movement, and it speaks to the integrity of which this election is going. Because I can't think of anything more democratic than saying, hey, John, here's $25 because I believe in what you're running on. And I wouldn't want it any other way.
Yeah, I mean, you can credit the Bernie Sanders campaign for kind of normalizing that kind of campaign donation. You endorsed him in 2016. Speaking of this 2020 race that just happened, Joe Biden angered a lot of people on the left by refusing to ban fracking. And he continues to do so, not just on the campaign trail. It wasn't just a campaign slogan. He seems to be committed to that as president. Many people speculated that was an effort to win over Pennsylvania. How does that square with your commitment not to take fossil fuel money and your belief that we should be kind of moving towards a massive amount of green energy infrastructure?
Great question. First though, fracking, especially when it's done recklessly the way it can be, it is incredibly destructive to the environment. And that's one of the many reasons why I've never taken a dime from that industry, because no one can say, well, it's because he's bought and paid for by an industry. And that's just not true. The position here in Pennsylvania is more nuanced than that, where it's like right now, we have to acknowledge that we must transition away from these fossil fuels, and we must embrace green energy on a more sustained level. But we also must recognize that we have to honor and safeguard the union way of life for these workers that are currently here in Pennsylvania, and also the transition for those workers into these new sectors and new technologies where it can't be perceived as, well, good luck, learn how to code, put in a resume at Google. That's just not true or what's fair. So the reality on the ground is more nuanced than that. And Joe Biden understood that. But at the end of the day, Joe Biden carried Pennsylvania because Pennsylvania fundamentally believes that he will do the right thing and he will make the tough decisions when it's appropriate, but he'll also split the difference and navigate a path that is also more nuanced and principled.
Yes, I understand that. You've mentioned union way of life a few times, and I read on your campaign website that you've cited that as well. Can you talk about more specifically how you would bolster unions if you were to win the race in 2022?
As a progressive, think about unions are one of the most progressive inventions in the history of modern times. It's so simple, but it's so revolutionary to this idea that workers have rights, that workers deserve to share in the wealth that their work creates. I mean, that's revolutionary because now you could take it for granted, but back then, especially where I live, that wasn't a given. Men and women died to achieve that. So let's be clear about that. And I will never understand, whoever they are, why you would seek to destroy, diminish, or eliminate the union way of life. I mean, it singularly built our middle class. And, no one seems to care about how rich billionaires get or what the CEO pay is. But we bristle when we talk about a living wage or we talk about union rights and union protections. I'll never understand it. And whenever there is a vote, whenever that would come up, whether it's stand with the union way of life or against it, there's no choice. I would always stand with the union way of life, just like we do in Pennsylvania. The governor and I are the first and second line of defense because the Republicans were eager to take Pennsylvania right to work. And they're going to have to pry the pen out of my finger because it's never going to happen so long as the governor and I are on that watch.
So, yeah, I wanted to talk to you about that dynamic. The Republican Party in your state, people might say it's extreme relative to the fact that, Pennsylvania can go either way in the presidential race. But to me, it's just emblematic of what the Republican Party's become nationally. I mean, they have obstructed the Democrats, and the fact that, you have a Democratic lieutenant governor, Democratic governor, and it's been a struggle ever since really the schism erupted, but also it was highlighted more nationally in the presidential election. Can you talk about the challenges you face with the Republican Party controlling the legislature in Pennsylvania?
Yeah. Well, they've controlled it through a gerrymandering process that they instituted back in 2010. So it created a disproportionate advantage in that respect. But where they are now is they are the party of obstruction and lies. And this last cycle was never more true. These same people, whether it's our congressional delegation or whether it's the state senators and state reps, were all claiming that, most of them were claiming that it was rigged. This is crazy. Not my race. I was on the same ballot as Joe Biden, but the voters love me, but Joe Biden, it was rigged. It's just absurd and logically bankrupt. In fact, a couple of them were even at the Capitol Hill riots on January 6th. One of the most vocal ones, in fact, Doug Mastriano. So it really comes down to this fundamental truth that Republicans will gerrymander, Republicans will alter the Constitution, Republicans will lie and spread misinformation when the votes don't go their way. And that's what they're attempting to do by gerrymandering our state Supreme Court, which they had no problem with until we won in 2015. And now all of a sudden they're activist judges. And it's an outrage that more of them don't live in different parts of the state. So they are shameless. And it's tragic because, gerrymandering is fundamentally anti-democratic. And by that, I mean to the American way of governance, the true will of the people. And the Republicans are democracy for me, but not for thee.
Two more questions. I wanted to ask you to expand on your stance on healthcare because I know you've been supportive of Medicare for All in the past. You talk about how healthcare is a human right on your campaign platform. What is your stance on healthcare? Are you supportive of universal health?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. It really comes down to it's a fundamental human right. I challenge anybody to say that you are not going to need healthcare at some point in your life. I mean, it's no different than food or shelter or education. It's something that any civilized, certainly affluent society as ours should not recognize that. Now, what that looks like, if there is a vote, I want to be clear, if there is a vote that would generate and create Medicare for all, I'm going to make that vote. If there is a vote to achieve it through another mechanism, whatever way we can inculcate that into the fabric of our society, I'm here for. I've always been outraged that the men and women that are making these laws and these decisions have government funded healthcare, and they seem to enjoy it. So to vote against the interests of healthcare for every American seems not only hypocritical, but deeply un-American and unfair. So that, I am here to stand with the truth that healthcare is a fundamental human right.
Thank you. And lastly, because I know you have to go, I saw you referred to as a populist, and I think, the right wing and Donald Trump have kind of thwarted that word, and it can be very broad. I don't even know if the right wing can be populist. That's my view. But I can see how somebody might refer to you as a populist. Do you embrace that label? What does that mean to you? What does that mean to you in your tenure as lieutenant governor? And what would it mean to you as senator if you were to win?
Sure. Yeah, it's funny the way the Republicans try to say populist, the guy that sits on a solid gold toilet and spent, tens of millions of dollars golfing at a country club. Only the Republicans could spin that narrative. But the truth is, I don't really focus on labels. I focus on universal truths, like we spoke, that a living wage, like healthcare is a basic right, that marginalized communities and places need investment and they deserve to be uplifted. I believe that LGBTQIA rights are fundamental. I mean, this idea that they don't deserve equal protection under the law is deeply un-American. Immigration, my wife's immigration story, we need a compassionate immigration protocol that acknowledges that immigration makes America America, and ending this war on drugs, legalizing marijuana as a party. Like when South Dakota is to the right of our party, the Democrats, we need to just say, hey, maybe we need to be a little more proactive on these things. So there isn't one area where it might be labeled progressive or populist, but to me, these are the truths that I've been championing, the people, policies, and places for the last 20 years that I've been in Braddock.
Thank you so much. John Fetterman, Lieutenant Governor of Pennsylvania and candidate for United States Senate in 2022. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today.
I'm honored to be here. Thank you so much for our time.
Thank you.